everyone, this is Marika and I welcome you all to this new session of Nursing Management with me. In our previous sessions, we have discussed very interesting topics such as job description and categorizing nursing professionals. In categorizing nursing professionals, in the very last session, we have discussed about a nurse supervisor. We also discussed about a nursing superintendent, a director, and about a head nurse. So in this session, we are going to discuss about staff nurses. We've already seen what are the different roles and responsibilities that are carried out by a nurse director, by a nursing superintendent, and a head nurse. Today, we are going to discuss about a staff nurse. Who is a staff nurse? What are the various education qualifications required to become a staff nurse? And what are the various functions that she carries out within the hospital, as well as the function of a staff nurse in the education. First of all, let us understand who is a staff nurse. A staff nurse is a person who has completed her nursing program from a recognized or an affiliated nursing school or a college. So we all already know that to become a staff nurse, once our schooling is done, we go into the college. In the college, to become a staff nurse, a person has to undergo a nursing degree. She has to undertake a nursing degree from a registered nursing school, which means the person can go for a GNM, or she has to go to a college of nursing wherein she does her Bachelor in Science degree. When I say the recognized nursing college, it means a college who is registered with the State Nursing Council as well as with the National Nursing Council. For example, all the colleges in Karnataka must be registered with Karnataka Nursing Council and also with the National Council, which is Indian Nursing Council. Let us now see the education qualification required to be a staff nurse. The first thing that we have discussed in the introduction is the general qualification, which is pre-university course. That means to become a staff nurse, an individual or a candidate must complete her schooling and then go into a course for staff nurses. The second qualification is a professional qualification. So after a student have completed her pre-university course, after the student have completed her schooling, the student then goes for a professional qualification, which is 3 years of course in general and midwifery nursing, which we call as GNM, or a bachelor degree, which is BSc nursing. And we are already aware that general nursing is a 3 years course, whereas BSc nursing is a 4 years course. The third important thing to be a staff nurse is the registration. Again, in the introduction, we have discussed that the course that is taken by the candidate must be from a registered college, which means the college must be registered under the state as well as the national council. So for registration, a student, a candidate, even after completing her degree must be registered under the state council as well as for the national council. Moving on, let us see what is a nurse-patient ratio. Indian Nursing Council will prescribe or will provide a particular ratio for the nurse and the patient within the hospital. Depending on the wards, depending on the severity of the condition of the patient in each of the ward, Indian Nursing Council will give a particular ratio that is to be followed in all the hospitals. First, let us start with general wards. In general ward, for a hospital that is attached with a nursing college, 1:3 is the ratio. That means there will be one nurse for 3 of the patient. Whereas for the hospitals where no nursing colleges are attached, the ratio is 1:5. For areas such as ICU and specialized care area, the ratio of the nurse and patient is 1:1. So we can understand in an ICU or in an area which requires specialized care for the patient, the number of nurses and the number of the patient must be equal, because the nurse needs to give continuous attention to the patient, and therefore 1:1 ratio is followed. For labor room, 4 nurses will be present for each shift. For operation theatres, 3 nurses will be available for 24 hours per table. In casualty and emergency department, the ratio of the nurse and patient is 1:1. And for pediatric unit, it is 1 nurse for 2 of the patient. So this is the ratio that is followed in the hospital, which is given by Indian Nursing Council. But the requirement of the nurse in a particular ward or within the hospital in different ward depends depends on various factors. The very first thing that affects the nurse-patient ratio is the size of the hospital. So obviously, the size of the hospital plays a major role. In size of the hospital as well, we will also see the number of beds that are available in the hospital and the occupancy of those beds by the patients. The second factor that influences the requirement of nurses within the hospital is the type of services offered. So we have already seen in ICU it is different, in casualty it is different, in general wards the ratio of the nurse and patient is different. Therefore, the service that the hospital offers is also one of the major factors to determine the requirement of nurses. For example, there will be hospital that provides only general services. There will be hospital that provides specialized services. There will be super specialty hospital as well as intensive care hospital. So for all this different kind of specialized treatment that is provided for the patient, the requirement differs from one hospital to another. The third factor that influences the requirement of nurses within the hospital is geographical distribution of the wards and the beds. For example, it depends on the hospital whether the hospital just has general wards or there are cubicles to separate one patient from another, whether there are only sharing rooms available within the hospital or private rooms are also available. So all of this also plays a major role in deciding the number of nurses that are required to work within the hospital. Another important factor that plays a major role is also the availability of other people who provides assistance to the staff nurse in performing various procedures. For example, dayas. Dayas are required in order to provide assistance to the nurse while the nurse performs a procedure. So if there is the availability of other people who helps the nurses to carry out the task, it becomes easier for the nurses. It is also necessary to see the people working within the hospital who work as an assistant for the nurse who performs various non-nursing services. And finally, the level of competency of the nurses also plays a major role. For example, the qualification of the nurse, the experience of the nurse, and also the efficiency with which the nurse works. Along with the qualification and the efficiency of the nurse, general discipline of the nurse also plays a major role. The government and the Indian Nursing Council have given a certain recommendation for the recruitment of nurses in the public sector hospitals. So how many number of nurses must be recruited? How many number of nurses are actually required? There is a certain recommendation that is given by Government of India as well as the Indian Nursing Council. Here we have to understand that even though we have a certain ratio that is given by Indian Nursing Council, we can still see the variation in the number of nurses working from one hospital to another. The Indian Nursing Council have given a recommendation wherein it is said that for an area which requires a lot of attention from the nurse, there should be presence of one nurse for one patient throughout the day. For example, areas such as critical care unit, medical surgical ICUs, neonatal ICUs, trauma care. So all of this area requires a lot of attention from the nurses, and therefore one nurse is assigned to only one of the patient. For intermediate care areas where the patient are still stable and are dependent on the nurse, 1:2 is the ratio that is followed. So that means one nurse will provide care to 2 of the patient in intermediate care areas. Patient in such areas may be stable, but they are dependent on the nurses for various assistance. And for routine care areas where patients are fairly stable and do not require much assistance from the nurses, 1:3 is the ratio that is followed, which means one nurse for 3 patients. For areas such as labor room, there should be one nurse for one delivery, and also in operation theatre, there should be one nurse per table. In the outpatient department or the outpatient clinic, only one nurse is assigned for many number of patients who comes to the outpatient department. And in casualty, it depends on the workload, depends on the flow of the patient. 2 to 3 nurses will be available in each of the shift. These are the recommendations that are given by Indian Nursing Council as well as Indian government for recruitment of nurses in the public sector. And with this, we have come to the end of today's session. And in our next session, we will be discussing about the roles and functions that are carried out by the staff nurse within the hospital as well as the educational function of the staff nurse. I hope the class was helpful, and I'll see you all in the next session. Thank you and have a great day ahead.